Hello, I'm Ibrahim Imam, and welcome to another episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. In this episode, we will continue exploring bipolar disorder. The last episode on this subject was titled Mercurial, the Volatile Mind of Bipolar Disorder. There, I looked at the history and clinical dimensions of the disease. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Lukas Klessig, author of Words with My Father, a bipolar journey through turbulent times. And this is a book that conveys the disease from the perspectives of a father and son. Lukas attributes the book to both his drive for creativity and the fulfillment of a promise he made to his dying father. Lukas studied history, Spanish, and international relations at UW-Madison and at Florida International University. But long before then, he made the point. He was an Eagle Scout at the age of 16, and he transferred those skills to jobs keeping violent kids safe, handing out menus in business parks, arranging luxury travel, and consulting on client marketing for global brands. Lukas is a proponent of mental health advocacy, animal welfare, outdoor living, and physical activity. Funny enough, his routine includes too much ice cream, bug spray, and bushwhacking. And maybe you'll explain that to me. Too many economics podcasts, worn out shoes, and anti-balding efforts. Lukas Klessig, welcome to the Neurology Lounge podcast, and thank you very much for sparing time for me today.
Well, thank you for entertaining that bio. Bushwhacking is just making trails in the woods and keeping the forest from encroaching on everything.
And bug spray, what's that about?
Lots of bugs here. We live in the middle of a wildlife refuge, so the farmers' pesticides don't reach here, so the bugs have free reign.
Okay.
Yep.
So long as there are no ticks that give Lyme disease, that's good enough.
Yeah. We don't have too many of those, just a few.
Good. Okay. The usual first question I ask is why authors write the books they write. And I got from your bio, kind of a promise you made for your father. But tell me about kind of the drive for writing the book.
Well, I made a promise to my dad. He developed a rare neurological disease. And on his deathbed, literally in the hospital, he asked me to finish this book that he thought was important to give other people with bipolar hope and to show them they could accomplish things. And I thought that was definitely a worthwhile goal. It took a lot of work, and the book we have now turned out a lot different than what he gave me in the hospital. I made that promise to him, and I'm really glad I kept it.
Well, I'm glad you did. And it's a unique perspective because you can actually hear the story from his side and then kind of your own perspective and commentary on what he experienced. How did you go about writing it? I know you said it took a lot of effort. What did it take to write it?
Well, we describe it as a narrative memoir, and I think with memoirs in general, you really have to pick a piece of your life, because if anyone describes their whole life, it gets really boring, just to be honest. And my dad was a prolific writer. Writing was part of his manic side.
Okay.
And this book in his original form contained a lot of extraneous things that veered away from the main message. So I cut probably 70-80% of it and really focused on those aspects I felt dealt the most with mental health, and gave real life examples and showed especially what mental health and mental health treatment looked like in those times in the 1950s through 70s.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, I brought my own voice into it to relate it to today's world and to give it a current purpose. And overall, we the main work was just narrowing it down and finding those essential elements. To sum up, a lot of editing.
Well, it came together quite well. Uh,
Thank you.
and he is a brilliant, he's a brilliant writer as well. Um, and a lot of the characterization of what happened to him is also greatly portrayed by you. Tell me what your recollection is of his manic episodes. What was he like?
Well, during my lifetime, my dad was very stable.
Okay.
He had a healthy dose of lithium for a long time, and so I didn't personally witness much of his bipolar swings. I would say one aspect that might have crept through is he was hyper productive pretty much all the time. Still to this day, I don't really understand how he managed to do all the things he did. I have right next to me here are probably 30 or 40 bankers boxes filled with essays he wrote that I've never even read. Um, and besides his family and his job, two different appointments. So I would say that is the clearest manifestation of his manic side, just how active his brain and his output was during my lifetime. But the the book and the story really focuses on before I was here, and his youth and the development of what we can kind of see as more untreated bipolar disorder. Um, so to answer your question shortly, um, we saw little hints of depression. In the winter time, sometimes he would have to really kick himself into gear to get going and get things done. I think maybe that's just a part of normal life. We all sort of feel that way in the winter. Um, and then, like I said, the manic side mostly I witnessed was productivity and just a lot of action and tasks that would be I still like it completely boggles me looking back on it how he did all these things. We all have the same amount of time, and I feel if I get 1/10 of what he did done, I feel accomplished. So
It's interesting. One of the things I got from reading a lot of memoirs on bipolar disorder is this reluctance or difficulty to keep up with lithium because it suppresses the creative urge. So people with bipolar tend to stop taking the medicines. But clearly, your dad was disciplined. He never had any great flare-ups then once he went on the treatment.
he tried to do exactly what you said. He tried to under quasi medical supervision. He took a trip to Alaska. This is described in the later part of the book.
Yeah.
He took a trip to Alaska and he tried traded his lithium dose along the way during the trip,
Okay.
and he went into full mania very quickly, and that was the last time he tried to go off of it.
Okay.
There's no doubt in his mind or in my mind that he missed some of that manic energy,
Yeah.
but he knew the trade-off for that was a loss of control, and he thankfully knew that trade-off wasn't worth it.
And
Yeah.
it's somewhere in the book where you kind of said mania relieved the slog of his depression, but it was far from enjoyable. Um, is it possible to tell which is more distressing? I mean, depression is distressing. Did he find the mania as distressing as the depression? Did you get that sense?
His mania, and I think I'm not a bipolar researcher or scientist, so I don't portray myself as an expert or um, the end of all knowledge on the subject. But his mania and most people's mania with severe or significant bipolar disorder, it can have pleasurable aspects, so some tinge of that euphoria,
Yeah.
a feeling of grandeur, but underneath all of that is just this anxious energy, this feeling of being on edge all the time, having all this energy and ideas flowing and brain activity, and not knowing how to satisfy that, not knowing how to close that train that keeps chugging along, and it just won't stop.
Mm.
And some people, of course, the train goes off the rails and they um, slip into psychosis and delusions. That happened to my dad one major time and a couple minor episodes of that happening. So I think part of our illusion with bipolar, especially the mania side, is that it's this happy-go-lucky, energetic, Pollyannish state. But for people who suffer with it, there's always that um, unquenchable, raw side of that energy. I would say I don't have bipolar, so I can only imagine it and read about it and hear from other people. But sort of if you would go for a run, but you would never reach the point where you would feel tired of running. You would just either keep going or fall over from exhaustion.
Yeah.
I think that's a good analogy for it.
Yeah, I agree. That captures it. Um, and then this kind of depression, you get the sense depression is one end and mania is on the other end.
Mhm.
But you made a comment, the opposite of depression is rarely euphoria. What did you mean by that?
Well, just what I said. It's there are some people with bipolar who describe being in a euphoric state as the opposite of their depression.
Mm.
Um, but from what I know, and I've read a lot and researched a lot, the majority of people with both major subtypes of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, mania is it's hard. It's not the easy button. Um, if depression is the hard part of life, mania is not the opposite. It's not the easy part of life. It they feel people in mania feel out of control. They don't know how to contain what's happening in their brain. They don't know a lot of times just what to do with all that energy. And so a lot of times it slips into what we would say are bad behaviors, spending too much money, sexual promiscuity, and loss of inhibition that way. Dangerous, risky behaviors, driving too fast. And so I think we have to keep that in mind that it can result in dangerous situations just like depression can.
Yeah, I think that's kind of important message to get across, that both ends of it are distressing, isn't it?
Yeah, true.
Okay. I mean, one of the questions I had was, what was it like for you personally growing up with a father who had bipolar disorder? But I mean, clearly he was well treated at the time. Perhaps the best depiction of what your relationship was is on your website. Quite a lot of pictures with you and your dad. What
Oh
was,
yeah.
what was, and it's kind of very touching pictures. What was it like growing up with him?
Over the last decade or so, I just wonder, I'm left in wonder at how he always seemed to have time for us beside all his other duties, and he always would take us out on adventures, especially outdoor stuff. And so this certainly isn't a story of angst between a parent with mental illness and a child who has to deal with that. That's not my experience. He um, kids always don't honor and recognize their parents' brilliance or sacrifices until later on, and that's the case with me. And I feel a little ashamed about that. That I didn't know that about him earlier in life, but looking back, it just amazes me how devoted he was to my brother and I, to my mom, and just to everything in his life. And like I said, how he seemed to find time for everything. Um, he wasn't a perfect person in in that sense. None of us are, and he just strikes me as a man of action, and who wanted to improve his own situation, his own family, and through his work, the larger world. And I really admire that.
And that, I mean, the pictures clearly showed a lot of outdoor activities, which a lot of people engage in. But I suppose the bipolar was kind of driving a bit of that, would you say, even though he was treated?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of outdoor activity. So whether the bipolar drove it or not, I'd say go for it
Yeah.
anyway. Um, I don't think we can deny that our connection with nature, even if we don't understand it completely,
Hmm.
it it keeps us in some sort of balance. I'm not uh, gonna veer off into some woo woo theories or philosophies, but I don't think we can deny that um, being in the presence of the natural world, especially purely, completely separated from man-made structures and what what we've added to the earth, is it has some sort of refreshing effect on all of us. And in my mind, that's a really, really important therapeutic strategy, is to include that in your routine.
Okay, the next few questions will be kind of taking quotes from your dad himself.
Okay.
He related, he talked about the traumas of 1968. Um, and he said the moderate mania drove me to action during the traumas of 1968 and the events that preceded and followed that terrible year. Well, two questions. How bad was 1968? And did he find the mania a bit therapeutic for the trauma he went through then?
At the time, he didn't know what he was really suffering from. So I don't think we can say that he used his manic urges as
Yeah.
an overt way to handle the tragedies of that year. Um, Yeah, 1968, and that general few years around there, you had the Vietnam War going on, you had Martin Luther King being shot and killed, and then Bobby Kennedy, and then a lot of political upheaval at um, based around the national elections. And it was a time sort of like today where people didn't know where they or where their country was gonna go. They didn't know, they couldn't see the near future or the far future. And in that sense, his his mania, but also his value system led him to try to, as he says, a little pedantically, to be on the right side of history in terms of civil rights and protesting the war and what we wanted America and to some extent the world to look like in the years that followed it.
And if I remember, he engaged in some risky activism, isn't it, around that time?
Well, his most risky activism was with the civil rights movement. He participated in some of the freedom rides in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, northern Florida, and faced a lot of threats from racist people. Got, pretty much directly shot at with a high powered rifle. When luckily that those old bulky windshield probably saved his life that day. I don't know if it would today.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And so those, he went on some of the Vietnam War protest marches where people faced beatings by the authorities, but the most dangerous parts occurred when he was at the front and center of those civil rights activities.
Yeah, as you said, it says a lot about his values at a time when a lot of people were not sure what values were.
Yeah. Like I said, from what I know and from what he wrote, he got a thrill from the danger and the risk. I think that reflects part of his mania during that time, but his values played an equal, if not larger, part in what drove him to do those things.
He did describe several episodes of his depression, and I thought the first was following a romantic heartbreak. He said the depression that followed was severe, and I spent most of each day curled up in a bunk bed in my first valley of despair. I mean, the phraseology there is excellent. Um, I think this was his first depressive episode, wasn't it? Or at least the one he wrote
The
about.
first one he remembers, yeah. It occurred during his early college years, and a lot of mental illness happens during those years for people. And so I have a good friend, Wendy, whose whole purpose is to help people in academia have more resources at their institutions
Yeah.
to manage mental health. So he faced heartbreak, and of course a lot of people might fall into a slump or a depression after that. But with clinical depression, it morphs and becomes more physical, and it becomes different. You don't necessarily feel sad. It's for a lot of people, it's just a total lack of purpose or energy or motivation. And I think it began with sadness for Dad, and then morphed into that deeper, more physical depression.
Yeah. Yeah, the people talk about the pain of depression, really.
Yeah, depression can cause physical pain.
And then another major depressive episode after he got married, when he said the darkness returned, even inside a stable marriage. And this was when he started thinking, he said he started to consider the possibility of a genetic basis for his mood changes. Why did he think of that?
For two reasons. First, like we just talked about, he started to dip into depression without any real catalyst, and
Yeah.
that a lot of times is a major indicator that somebody has clinical depression, where they will periodically and maybe even on a regular basis fall into depression, and they don't know why. There's no real event that triggers it, and that started to happen to my dad. You can say that his his falls into depression went with the seasons. You know that he typically went into a depressive episode during the winter, but even during the rest of the year, he would have shorter spans of depression where they just happened and he didn't know why. So um, that's the first reason, and then the second one is like you said, he started to pay more attention to or recognize that a lot of people in his family had exhibited those classic depression symptoms before, even if they had tried to hide it or it wasn't formally diagnosed, because that wasn't a common thing to do back then.
And then he wrote about the things that indicated that he was going to recover from his depression. He said, I could tell the day, almost the hour, when my head would clear and the world would suddenly look shiny and exciting. Um, what's your take on that?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for everyone
Yes.
who has bipolar. For Dad, it did result in a rapid change. Um, Most of those changes happened during the springtime, where just one day, sort of out of the blue, this jarring and sudden shift from just getting by, basically existing with depression and the doldrums and lack of energy would shift. And I think after he started to, a few of those shifts, he started to recognize that and sort of self perpetuated his uh, his recovery, as you said. And so when he started to feel that, he accelerated it
Okay.
by psyching himself up and wanting to get going and start working on all the things he had left languish during depression. Um, Maybe a good analogy would be going from 0 to 60 miles per hour in one day,
Yeah.
or maybe 2 miles per hour to 80 miles per hour in one day. Um,
Interesting.
and that really felt refreshing to him. So, like I said, I think he, whether subconsciously or more thinking critically about it, he looked forward to that moment where he could escape the depression.
And I suppose it must have given him some hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel. The thing with depression for many people is this sense of it will never end.
Yeah, my dad had for a lot of what we might term um, high functioning by people with bipolar disorder or with depression, he couldn't stand that he was neglecting his duties. So he was just sort of waiting, and all this backlog of work and responsibilities, maybe it eventually broke that dam. And when that first bit of energy started coming, he saw that opportunity, and then the dam broke, and he had to make good on the things he neglected during his depression. And I think that's the case for a lot of people who learn to not perfectly, but somehow manage those mood swings.
To ride the highs, so to say, I suppose. You did mention the relationship of the depression to winter. And he was diagnosed at one time with seasonal affective disorder. He was prescribed a sun lamp. Did that help? Did that help at all?
The first one didn't help because I don't know for sure, because I've never seen this sun lamp, but it probably didn't mimic natural light very well.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of the lamps is to shine more light onto the skin and into the eyes, to reinvigorate some of those symptoms and get things moving, so to say. I don't know the exact science. But I remember, that's one of my most vivid memories of Dad, is we would go upstairs where he had his office, and he'd be lying there with this, one or even more lamps just blasting on his face, either on the ground or even on his desk. So I remember it was, you would open the door and it would just be this explosion of light in the room.
Yeah. There was a phrase where he captured this desire to catch up with what is lost once the mania kicked in. He said, "In 2 condensed and frenzied weeks, I caught up on all my reading, papers and assignments, and breezed through my finals and thesis projects." He clearly used that phase to compensate for the inactivity of depression.
Yeah, he had a very deep aversion to failing at his initially his academic work or his job, and so I think that helped him. It wasn't the ideal situation, of course, to try to cram all of that into that sleepless 2 weeks. That's not usually a good strategy. But he persevered, and he made it through that in a frenzy, as we say.
Yeah, it's frenzy 2 weeks. You alluded to the other features of mania, which is engaging in pleasure-seeking activities. I think he did write about that in the college days, but once he started treatment, were there any things like, did he have any episodes of spending excessively?
No, you have to understand his background. He grew up in a very stoic and religious and strict family, who, his parents lived through the Great Depression, and they were very self-sufficient. That was one of the pillars of the community, was being able to care for yourself and your family. So I think if he did have any of those impulses, that value system drove them away. He did drink his fair share of beer in high school and college, but that probably would have happened anyway. Just, it was whether good or bad, that was part of his environment. So,
Yeah, it's interesting how much environment can influence the
yeah.
cause of illnesses. Um, and it was in college that he was eventually diagnosed, I mean, with the old name manic depression. And he said the doctor changed his medication. He had counseling sessions and literature on positive self-talk. What impact did these interventions have then? I mean, that was before lithium, I
They
guess.
started to help him,
Okay.
and this, just to put it in context, the medications we're talking about were before he started lithium and more appropriate treatments for bipolar disorder. So they started to help him. I think we can definitely say that. But eventually, he fell into even worse depressive episodes and the suicide attempt that we describe in the book. It's sad to say, but that might have the failures or the temporary effectiveness of those initial treatments might have reinforced in his mind that there wasn't any hope because he was doing all the things he was supposed to do and he wasn't getting better. Um, and that's not to throw aspersions on his doctors or they were doing the best they could with what they knew.
Yeah, it's almost always a topsy-turvy journey, ups and downs. Um, and there's one that occurred, I think, when I think his wife, Lois, he said, struggled to cope with his moods and her endurance finally ran out and she moved out. And again, heartbreak kind of, he said, the stark depression emerged suddenly. How much did that affect him? It looks like it was a major event at that time, his wife moving out and
Yeah, that was right before his suicide attempt. Even more than the heartbreak, that Lois served in a way as his last remaining anchor to real life. And he doesn't blame her in any way for, he said it overtly that she stuck with him longer than she should have. So he doesn't blame her. But when she left, it just amplified the isolation and probably a little break from reality. Um, so much that crept into the moment where he lost all hope and tried to kill himself. Um, so I think it shows that the power of support systems and having uh, openness with people about what you're going through. Because after Lois left the picture, he didn't have that. Partly self-inflicted because he didn't tell people.
there are a few uh, comments about how much control he had over his symptoms. And I was going to ask whether that has to do with personality. You already mentioned his background, but you mentioned things about him being able to camouflage his disorder. How much, I mean, specifically for him, how much was he able to exert some control over his symptoms? And can that be generalized across the board with this illness?
All mental illness is individual, so that's part of the difficulty of treating it.
Mm,
But my perspective is that we need to highlight and encourage and applaud people's sense of willpower over their life and their disease, whether bipolar or something else. Because if we don't do that, it robs them of agency and actually impairs their chances of improving. Maybe in the most severe cases, we can say there hardly any control exists. Maybe we can say that, but even if a person like my dad would say, "There's nothing I can do about it. It's just how I feel. It's I don't have any control over what my mood is." We need to find that willpower that exists hiding in the corner,
Yeah.
and applaud that and encourage that. Because, like I said, besides the most severe cases, I think that some semblance of control and willpower exists there, and it's beneficial to recognize it.
Mm. And to emphasize that lesson, you said resilience is the lesson I hope this story imparts.
Right, because if a patient or someone with mental illness doesn't feel that they have any willpower, they're so much more likely to sink into hopelessness and to say there's nothing I can do about it. Suicidal ideation probably increases when that happens, and so we need to encourage them trying to find those areas where they can exert control and willpower and see the results of it.
I think that's a powerful lesson. And I guess you need that resilience even to try different medications, isn't it? When one fails, even to try another one, you need that bit of staying power.
Yeah. With medication and with everything else, if you face a chronic illness of any kind, whether mental or in other parts of the body, sometimes you have to maneuver your life in order to manage it. And my dad certainly did that. He passed up on careers that would have paid him 5, 6, 7 times as much to stay in academia because he knew that setting allowed him more support and more flexibility for his bipolar disorder. He bought the ranch where I'm sitting right now, so he could have that connection with nature, and he could have that natural therapy. He could have lived closer to his job and in the city where the university is, where he taught. And one thing we highlight in the book is it's a little humorous, but he never thought he would be a farmer because he sort of rebelled against that family. His family came from generations of farmers, and he said, "I'll never be a farmer again. I don't want to have to live that life." And then in his 30s, it wasn't his livelihood, but he started a farm because taking care of those cows and horses when we had them and other animals in the fields, it helped him manage his bipolar disorder. It helped him, especially during depression. It gave him a purpose to get out of bed and to start his day, because if he didn't, the animals would die and the fields and the crops would fail. And that overtly became part of his management system for his bipolar.
Okay.
And it seems sort of quaint and spontaneous, but that really served as a framework and a structure to help him keep on the rails for his disease.
And it's a lesson of life as well, isn't it? Look for a goal that's much bigger than you and kind of grounds you. I interviewed somebody on a different disorder, but he also had bipolar, and what he said was the moment he the moment he told his workplace that he had the diagnosis, they sacked him straight away. Did your father ever experience this kind of stigma, or did was he kind of usually was he?
He wasn't he didn't announce his disease, as far as I knew, ever.
Okay.
Our family knew about it. Um, so he didn't face that overt stigma that you just described, or discrimination. But part of the reason he kept it hidden was fear of stigma. And, we still face a lot of that fear today. I've been reading recently about the problems with airline pilots that, like, your guest, if they disclose a psychological disorder,
Yes.
it's pretty likely that they're going to get furloughed and then fired, um, which may be appropriate for their profession, but it also causes pilots with serious problems to hide it, and then it plays out in more extreme ways down the road.
And still on the theme of stigma, you said all of us with mental illness suffer three times in terms of stigma, from the illness itself, from the specific stigma associated with the particular disease, and from the generic prejudice against anyone identified as mentally ill or sick in the head. Um, and that kind of stigma is more for mental illness, isn't it? Less so than with physical illness. Is it something about a fear people have of mental illness more than they do for physical illness, you think?
I have a little bit more nuanced of a take on this than say, other mental health advocates, especially in high risk professions like I mentioned, the pilots and probably medicine and the military. And we need to keep mental illness in mind. We can't just ignore it and say they should be able to do whatever they want, in terms of a job or profession, no matter what. You don't want a fighter pilot with narcolepsy or with, bipolar disorder. We can't operate in that black or white. Everybody should or shouldn't do certain things. But then again, we also need to have more compassion for people with mental illness and not treat them as pariahs or people without the hardiness or the strength to live normal lives. I tend to take a more nuanced and individual look at those situations than a lot of other people in the field might.
A more hard-nosed approach, but more realistic, more realistic and pragmatic, I think.
Yeah, because I just, I talk to a lot of people in this space, and they want to clear any impediments for any activities or opportunities for people with mental illness. But some of those impediments are there for safety. And
Yeah.
I think we do everybody a disservice um, if we just clear all of those obstacles. We need to have some sense of realism about it. When my dad was suicidal, he didn't, he shouldn't have been a bus driver or a person taking care of other people because he might have injured them along with himself. And so we need to keep that in mind and not and ignore the nuances of those situations.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Um,
Okay.
I do agree with that. Um, we we're very brutal in stopping people from driving when they have one little blackout, so their safety always comes high. Um, okay, and one last, I think is one last thing about him, and then we kind of move on to you a bit. Um,
Okay.
how much did he referred to lithium as a wonder drug that actually works wonders? How much did it change his life when he started it?
It was a wonder for him because not just what it did to him in terms of his chemistry, but he just found such relief, even catharsis, in knowing that he wouldn't have to deal with that uncertainty of either falling into a valley of despair, of depression, or going into manic frenzy. He now had some sort of tool to give him more certainty that his life could continue in a relatively straightforward path, instead of taking these wild turns that he couldn't predict or deal with. Um, and so you might call that a placebo effect or whatever you want to call it, but I think just that assurance helped him as much as the chemical effects of lithium.
Yeah, that's. I was just thinking about somebody else who wrote about the fear that the medicine they are using would eventually stop working, and that fear
Right?
was probably not justified, but that thought that you could go back to what it used to be before treatment. Um,
Yep.
okay, coming down to you, knowing that bipolar disorder runs down your father's maternal side, how concerned are you about the risk personally?
At this point in my life, I don't think about that aspect just because I've done so much research for the book and seen other family members with bipolar that I can recognize that even though I have slight mood changes, it's different than bipolar disorder. Um, I think we too often pathologize just the normal vagaries of life as disorder these days. I do deal with very clinical, sort of textbook OCD. I've had that since my early teens. Um, so I've had enough experience and I know enough that bipolar disorder doesn't worry me. It's I have enough to enough to do with the OCD. I'm very stable, thank God, and um, had a lot of really top tier help with it. I don't have children myself, but my brother has a few kids, so he needs to watch them as they get to that age where it tends to develop to see, if those tendencies start to appear or not. And hopefully they won't, but we know they might.
But there's awareness now and the kind of interventions.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing was this the Alzheimer's disease, which again, I think runs on your father's side.
Yep.
Um, did he ever manifest any cognitive impairment of any sort?
He did, but not from dementia or Alzheimer's. The disease that took his life, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's a neurological disease, so it did significantly harm his cognition and his faculties and eventually killed him. Um, so he did face that, but not from dementia or Alzheimer's. And I don't, that's not something I need to worry about at this stage in my life. I don't plan on getting a genetic test for it or uh, being particularly vigilant about watching for it. not, not at that age yet. So I don't see any point in really worrying about it right now.
Quite sensible, quite sensible.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, okay, some kind of winding down. I know we've talked about some of the lessons you wanted to portray, you want to bring resilience. Are there any couple of other lessons you wanted readers to take away from the book?
Like you said, resilience and the necessity of self agency and responsibility, uh, not just because those are inherently good things, but they can aid in your recovery and they can accelerate improvement. And the second main takeaway, or maybe the overall most important takeaway of the book, is the power of purpose
Okay.
and the power to have something that drives you, even when you're facing a serious episode, that there's something that you want to accomplish, even if it's in the very back of your mind, there's something you want to accomplish and it keeps you moving forward and it gives you a reason to live and deal with that depressive episode or to take measures not to go into full mania or just to stay on track to try to reach that goal. And we write about in the book how those facets of purpose, they're not just long term, they're every day. Like my dad's cows and his purpose to
Mm,
keep them alive,
yes.
and his family and not to neglect his family. And one of the things he did was he would place pictures of things he cared about when he was feeling more depressed to give him a little reminder of the reasons to be more active and to get his um, to break him out of that funk a little bit. So, and it's sort of a generic term. A lot of people have defined that power of purpose, but I think our story really highlights how it can help people with bipolar and mental illness and in general. And a third main takeaway, as we talked about earlier, is just the power and the significant therapeutic effect of natural immersion. And you don't have to go in the woods and live like a hermit, but to find those opportunities where you can just get that natural refresh and be out in nature. It's really important. And like I said, we don't exactly know why. I don't know if we ever will. Um, but it certainly helped my dad, and I think it helps all of us.
Okay. I'm not sure whether the next question is fair on you. You did say you're not a specialist, but what would you say are the major questions or uncertainties the in the field of bipolar disorder?
We're always searching for a genetic marker or basis or the exact chemical interaction that quote unquote causes bipolar disorder or any psychiatric illness. And that's important work, and we should continue that work, but at the same time recognize what we're dealing with in terms of the complexity, the scale of complexity there. I I do support a philanthropic organization called Bipolar Discoveries. It's part of the Milken Institute in Washington, D.C. And they're devoting hundreds of millions of dollars to those scientific questions. So if anybody wants to see sort of what the cutting edge science is regarding bipolar disorder and its causes, I would encourage them to check Bipolar Discoveries out because I can't explain it to you, and I'm not going to try. They do really intensive work with universities all around the world, and they also do a good job of trying to relate that information understandably.
Good. I will check it out. I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah.
And how bright do you think the future is with genetics now, with genetic engineering and all that? Do you think 10 years, 15 years down the line, you can have a
I
cure?
can't make those predictions. I wish I could or somebody else could.
Okay.
Like I said, we have to recognize it's a huge undertaking. We'd like there to be a one size fits all model to exist and to have. I've been reading a lot lately about metabolic psychiatry and other more theoretical basis of etiology and like I said, all that work is really important and we should continue to do it. But I don't know, just from our experience, if we're ever going to be able to say this is the definitive cause or this imbalance is what causes it because it's so complex and it's so dependent on lifestyles and genetics and epigenetics and all that sort of stuff. So it's if you're interested in complexity, this is the field you should go into. There's a lot of smarter people than me that might give you a little bit better answer, but that's what I can contribute.
I doubt if there'll be a smart answer or detail, I suppose, but it comes.
Right. True.
Okay. Have you published any other works or books?
This is my first book. My dad published hundreds of articles and papers and um, two other books, but they didn't deal with mental illness.
Okay.
So for my first outing, I think we did a really good job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And are you working on anything, I know, apart from advocacy and philanthropy?
Currently, we have some shorter pieces. At the end of Words with My Father, there's a collection of shorter poems and essays that he wrote. So we have different ones, not the ones in the books, but different ones that will appear in some literary journals later this year, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily about mental health, but engaging reads and entertaining. And on that note, I'm collecting and rewriting and editing a bunch of those, and we're gonna release them as an anthology.
Okay.
So with themed sections. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, give us a shout when it's ready. Something to broaden our minds, I believe.
Yeah, these pieces are some of them are humorous and some are about environmental philosophy, and it's I think it'll be a more have a broader appeal too.
Okay. Um, do you have a title for it yet?
Oh
Oh,
no, not even close to that point.
okay. Okay. Do you have any three books with titles that you want to recommend about the brain, about bipolar, or anything really? Free box, free text.
I would say they're a little older, but any of K. Redfield Jamison's books. My favorite one is Brain on Fire, which explores bipolar disorder and creativity. Her most famous book is called An Unquiet Mind. And they're a little older, and they might not include all the newest perspectives, but they're very well written and very readable, and um, give great insight into bipolar disorder. Second book, maybe, yeah, let's go with Brain Energy by Chris Palmer, I think it is. He That's a book that gives a good overview of metabolic psychiatry and how metabolism and energy affect behavior.
Okay.
And see, do an environmental one. The Power of Trees,
Oh,
which is by a German author. I can't remember his name right now, but the it's titled The Power of Trees, and it's not. It has a lot of actual science in it, and some philosophy, but it's a more reality based environmental book that I enjoyed a lot.
well, I'm glad you advocated K. Redfield Jameson's book. I did poach a bit of it in the monologue that will precede this discussion.
Oh, okay.
Excellent. That's good. So I made a good choice to include her.
Yeah, it's sort of um, the pillar book about bipolar disorder, and with good reason. So she herself is a scientist and a
Yes,
professor, so it gives her uh, an extra layer of credibility
yeah,
to know the
absolutely.
ins and outs of the subject.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you advocated for that book.
Okay.
Lukas Klessig, thank you very much for participating in this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. I am really grateful, and I know with the time zone difference, again, you've sacrificed that as well. Um, to my audience, thank you very much for listening or watching the podcast. If you enjoyed it, click on the like button, or better still, subscribe so that you don't miss subsequent episodes of the podcast. And whilst waiting for the next episode, why not check my neuro checklist neurology database, or you might explore my own little book called Surfing the Brain. Until the next episode, thank you very much. And Lukas, I'm very, very grateful. Thank you very much for your
Hey,
time.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.